It's late in the city and quiet in my house. I wanted to take the opportunity of sharing the Divrei Torah that I said today at the Brit of my grandson, who is newly named Lavi. So in this week's Parsha, it still counts as this week until Tuesday, apparently. In this week's Parsha, the daughters of Tzalafchad innovate in the Torah. They ask about their father who died. He was not among Korach's party. He was not among those who plotted against Moshe, against Moses. And they claim with no brothers that their father's name should live on in them. The daughters go to Moses and ask him about this, and he forgets and has to ask God. The sages understand that Moses forgets. Well, one approach is he forgets because the virtue of the daughters of Tzalafchad, and he wanted to give them the benefit of a kind of authorship in the Torah, which is interesting that here the feminine are intervening. Moses forgets because of them, and because of their forgetting, Moses asks God. God affirms what they say, and then their laws are, as it were, added to the Torah. The sages of the Talmud take every opportunity to look at the saintly people in our tradition and to see them in a human light. That even the greatest of prophets, even the greatest of figures, Moses and David, who we'll talk about in a minute, they are shown to have very human characteristics and characteristics not to be emulated. So Moses' story, the reason he forgets it, another approach, is that in the past, when he had been delegating judicial responsibility to other people, he says to them, it says the Torah, he says, you come to me for the more difficult cases. Chazal, the sages, look at this as a form of arrogance on his part, and the way they read it, Moses says, you deal with the small things. If there's anything big that comes up, come to me. Sages compare this to a storekeeper who exchanges money. And he says to his young assistant, when small change comes in, you take care of it. But if a pearl, for example, comes in, I'd like you to call me. So the young man works and works and works. And one day a pearl does come in, or it seems to be the case. In fact, it's a string of glass beads. And when the young assistant brings it to the owner, he's unable to identify it as phony. So what comes out of that story is don't give up on the little things for the big thing. That is, if you want to train for the big thing, if you want to train, if you aspire to greatness, if you aspire to lead, then you must do the small things as well. You can't do the big things without the small things. We see people in our lives who are unsuccessful because all they do is think about the big things and they don't think about the intermediate. How do I get from the smaller things to the big things? Not only Moses comes under the attack of the sages, not really the attack, but we look at him in a critical human light, but also David. This story starts with David jumping around and saying to God, or proclaiming, your statutes to me, God, are like songs in my mouth. They flow off my tongue. And God says, oh, really? And recalls God here in Talmudic mode. God is recalling now something that happens in Chronicles where a mistake is made, where the Ark of the Covenant is transported on a new wagon. And as this is happening, this new wagon, the law, in a minute I'll tell you what the law is otherwise, but because this is the Ark of the Covenant is not meant to be carried in a wagon, magically, mystically, the wheels of the wagon fall down and the Ark is, as it were, suspended in midair. Some people will read this as a divine magic trick, but I think a better way of reading it is, so Uzzah, poor Uzzah, comes in and thinking that it's going to fall, he tries to save the ark, but in the process shows his lack of faith to God, I guess, and God punishes him by striking him down. David comes to God and says, Why did you do this? Why did you paratz? Why did you jump and burst forth and kill Uzzah? And God says, because you didn't learn properly. You didn't read properly. If you don't read properly, if you don't read and learn properly, then people will suffer. Our leaders have to know how to read. Our readers need to know how to take their ideals and to manifest them in reality. And David fails in that respect, and he fails in such a way that not him, I mean, he suffers because he suffers from the guilt of his involvement, one would imagine in this narrative, but he suffers because Uzzah is killed because of his careless reading. I think and this is what I emphasized for my grandson, is that you see that the tradition, what we carry on from one generation to the next, what we consider to be important that we pass on to our children, so our lives are not just a generational tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, that's Macbeth, meaningless time. So our teaching to our children, I think is future oriented. It's looking back to the past, but also future oriented. And that's what tradition is. Tradition is misread as being that something that goes only back to the past, but tradition really is future oriented. And in order for us to have a tradition that goes into the future, we cannot rely upon mechanisms. We cannot rely upon trucks or cars. We can't rely upon technology. We can't rely upon those things that we rely upon all of the time as the means through which we communicate. If you want to take, in this case, in the Jewish tradition, if you want to take the divine revelation into the future, you have to carry it on your shoulders. You have to do it with your body and soul. And without doing that with your body and soul, it will fail, and it will be catastrophic, and people will die. Because, and I mean, that sounds, who cares if a tradition doesn't go forward? Why would that be fatal? And well, if a tradition doesn't go forward, if our traditions of what is just and what is unjust, if those traditions aren't passed on in ways that make sense to us, again, we can't delegate our ethics or our beliefs to other people, to technologies. If we do that, then there really is no future. And the Midrash here blames David, but also really primarily emphasizes that when tradition goes forward, it goes forward. This is an appropriate thing, I thought, to say at Brit Milah, the renewing or the establishing of the covenant through the seed of Abraham, going back to the past, but also into the future, because the Brit is an eternal covenant. And what that is meant to convey, the eternal covenant, is that there is a meaningful future. There's a past, there's a future, and that present is part of that future. That's what Brit Milah really is about. It's about the birth of a child entering into this covenant, the beginnings of life, and simultaneously the continuity of life. So carry it on your shoulders.